Hello, my name is Jamie Deaton, and it is my distinct pleasure to introduce two of my fellow colleagues, Dr. Samantha Burg and Dr. Sheila Thompson. Dr. Burg is a statistician and psychometrician in the Assessments Division of the National Center for Education Statistics. She is currently the National Project Director for the Program for International Student Assessment, also known as PISA. Dr. Burg has worked as a psychometrician and in test development for over 20 years, including 10 years with the National Assessment of Educational Progress. She provides technical support related to PISA research in design, as well as working on PISA reports and releases. Dr. Burg holds a BS in Mechanical Engineering, a Master's in Mathematics Education, and earned a PhD at UNC Chapel Hill in Education Testing. Dr. Sheila Thompson is a mathematical statistician in the Assessments Division of the National Center for Education Statistics. She currently serves as the National Research Coordinator for the Progress in International Reading Literacy Study, known as PIRLS, providing daily coordination of the study for the United States. Dr. Thompson has over 30 years of research and assessment experience working at the university level and with state and local educational agencies. Dr. Thompson has a bachelor's degree in psychology from Morgan State University, a master's in educational psychology from Michigan State University, and a PhD in educational psychology from Howard University. Today, Dr. Burg and Dr. Thompson will be presenting on international reading assessments and results. Thank you so much for joining us.
Today, we will be discussing international reading assessments and results. I am Sheila Thompson, and my colleague is Samantha Burg. NCS International Activities Program has activities, surveys, and assessments across the age span from kindergarten through adulthood. Today, I will be discussing PIRLS, or the Progress in International Reading Literacy Study for grade 4 in reading. Samantha will be discussing PISA, or the Program for International Student Assessment for 15-year-olds. Next slide. And I serve as the National Research Coordinator for PIRLS. As an overview, I'd like to share that fourth graders' student performance in reading literacy is assessed by PIRLS. PIRLS focuses on students' transitions from learning to read to reading to learn. It has been conducted since 2001, and the United States has participated in each assessment from 2001, 2006, 2011, and 2016. PIRLS is usually administered between March and June. In addition to the student assessment, there are context questionnaires for schools, teachers, and students. They serve as background questionnaires for each group. Next slide. Across the world, in 2016, more than 330,000 fourth grade students participated in 58 education systems. Approximately 10,000 fifth graders in approximately 290 public and private schools will be included in 2021 within the United States. Next slide. In terms of results from 2016, our most recent results showed us that there were 12 education systems scoring higher than our fourth graders in the US, and they're noted below. There were 15 systems not significantly different from US students, so they're noted in the second and third columns on the slide. Next slide. Also in 2016, 30 education systems scored lower than students from the US. And these are noted. Next slide. Let's talk about the components of PIRLS. It is a pen and pencil based assessment using paper. It looks at reading comprehension. It's administered every 5 years since 2001 to over 50 countries. In 2021, PIRLS will be administered for the 5th time. However, in 2021, due to COVID and schools closing, in the United States, we will be assessing grade 5 students in the fall of the year. ePIRLS is an online assessment. Information is presented in a simulated internet environment to assess students' ability to comprehend and interpret online informational text, such as history and science. In 2016, ePIRLS was the first assessment that looked at the online assessment. However, in 2021, we have digital PIRLS, and it's a transition where countries can administer PIRLS in digital or paper format. Digital PIRLS includes PIRLS, as noted above, and ePIRLS in one assessment. Therefore, a bridge study will be conducted so that we can compare paper and digital in 2021. Next slide. This graph shows how the US average reading scores were scored from 2001 to 2016, how our students performed. You can see that the line is relatively flat. However, for 2016, scores were not significantly different, but there were significant differences for 2006 and 2011. Our scores range from low to advanced. Next slide, please. PIRLS and ePIRLS compared to our international peers was also analyzed. As noted before, for PIRLS there were 58 systems with 12 systems scoring higher, 15 scoring about the same, and 30 scoring lower. For ePIRLS, there were 16 systems scoring in the assessment, with 3 scoring higher, 2 about the same as the United States, and 10 systems scoring lower. Next slide. Now we will have results and information shared by Dr. Samantha Burg.
Great. Thank you, Sheila. And thank you, Jamie, for our introductions. And we appreciate y'all joining us today. As Sheila said, we are talking about international assessments. So we're going to talk about another international assessment, the Program for International Student Assessment, which is PISA. A little bit of the PISA background. PISA actually is not a grade-based assessment, but an age-based assessment. So we look at students who are 15-year-olds across the globe. We also in PISA assess not only reading, but mathematics and science literacy as well. We also, a couple iteration cycles that we've been through, we've collected information about financial literacy, which has been really interesting. PISA is a little bit different than other academic large-scale assessments. We're focused on, in PISA, about how students apply their knowledge and skills to a real-world context. So this is more of a literacy assessment rather than assessing academic knowledge and skills. PISA is conducted every 3 years, but starting back in 2000, except for, as Sheila mentioned, there's all these glitches because of COVID. So PISA, the next PISA, instead of coming out in 2021, will be 2022. We usually administer PISA in October, November, so sort of the beginning of the school year. And PISA includes not only the content assessment, but includes context or background questionnaires for students and schools. There are no teacher questionnaires in PISA. PISA also moved to be a computer-based assessment several cycles ago, so this is all administered via computers. Here shows a map of the number of 79 different countries and education systems that participated in the last round of PISA, the data that we'll look at today from 2018. As you can see, it covers a lot of countries across the globe, more than 600,000 students. And in particular, in the US, that included almost 5,000 students and over 162 public and private schools. All right, so let's take a look at the average scores here. So what you see in the blue box or the table are average scores that were higher than the US. So you can see that's a number of educational systems in China and Singapore, plus a number of other countries, as you can see, Estonia, Canada, Finland, and Ireland. Now, in the right-hand column, the gray column, these are scores that are not measurably different, or we would call it statistically significantly different than the US average score. And you can see the US there in the green row, as our score was 505, which was actually higher than the OECD average of 487. So this meant in 2018, the US ranked 9th in reading literacy. Let's dig in a little deeper and talk about the top performers. So in PISA, there's a number of different levels. So these are the top level and above. And so you can see, given the bar chart here, there's a asterisk there shown by Singapore and by a couple of the different education systems in China, that those were significantly higher than the US. But then there's a lot of other countries, starting with Canada, that are about the same scores or percentages in reading literacy. So we see that the US percentage of the top performers was larger than the OECD average, which is that darker bar at the bottom. And more specifically, we see that the US percentage was around 14%, while the OECD average was about 9%. And again, because of the statistically significant differences, we see that the US was ranked 3rd when we look at our top performers only. All right, so this graph I know is a little bit busy, but we're looking at the average and percentile scores across the years. So this is for the US, and obviously starting from the top, that red or maroon line is the 90th percentile, followed by the red open squares, which are the 75th percentiles. Then we have the average score is the gold line in the middle. And then those last two lines represent the 25th percentile and the 10th percentile. So we can see that when we look at that yellow line, there's really been no change in the US average score overall. A couple points here and there, but again, not statistically significant. We do, however, see some increases in US scores for those two higher percentiles, the 75th and the 90th percentile. And we see that from 2015 to 2018. And there's a couple others, we can see those by the asterisks, but again, we're just looking at comparisons back to 2015, but you can also see that those were higher than some of the other years as well. Unfortunately, we see a trend happening at the lower percentiles. So when we're looking at the 10th percentile, we see that the scores have decreased from back at 2012 to 2018. And this pattern is something that we see over several other assessments, and is something that we're trying to figure out what's going on. And we hope that researchers will be able to help us identify why those struggling readers and students performing at the 10th percentile are struggling with their reading scores. Sheila and I also wanted to convey to you sort of a comparison or summary of all the different assessments. Sheila talked about PIRLS, which is that second column there. In the middle column, you see PISA. And then we thought it would be interesting to compare this to NAEP. Again, these are all large scale assessments, and what do they measure, and how are these assessments the same or different? So Sheila mentioned that PIRLS is 4th grade, and as many of you will know, that NAEP also measures 4th grade in addition to grades 8 and 12. As I said, PISA, though, is not a grade-based assessment, but it's based on age, and so we looked at 15-year-olds in PISA. Both PISA and PIRLS are looking at reading literacy, as opposed to NAEP, which is, in addition to many of the other subjects NAEP assesses, its reading assessment is more of an academic classroom performance based on the material that students have been taught in class. That next row looks at both the initial year and the most recent year. So you can see that NAEP started early on in the early 1990s, and both PIRLS and PISA started in the early 2000s. Again, also we see that PIRLS most recently reported out in 2016, followed by PISA in 2018, and NAEP was actually able to report out in 2019. Now, when we look at the frequency, we can see that NAEP is the most frequently assessed subject. Okay, so for reading and math, that's assessed every 2 years. Now, that's for grades 4 and 8. So some of the other subjects in reading and math in grade 12, that varies. But for grades 4 and 8, reading and math, that's every 2 years. The next frequency happens with PISA. So that's every 3 years, and followed by PIRLS, which is every 5 years. There's also some differences in the assessment windows. So when the assessment cycle starts, NAEP is out first, assessing students from January through March. Then PIRLS follows closely behind NAEP and goes out in the schools collecting data March through June. And then it's not until the beginning of the next school year that PISA comes in and gathers data in October and November. Sheila and I both have talked about the different components to these assessments. So you can see that PIRLS is very similar to what we gather in NAEP. So we have students who take the content assessment or the cognitive assessment, but they also take survey questions, as do the teachers in schools. PISA also has similar assessments and questionnaires for the students in schools, but there's no teacher assessment to that. PIRLS and NAEP are both computer-based assessments. And as Sheila mentioned, right now, PIRLS and ePIRLS are paper and computer-based, but digital PIRLS is coming online. And after this bridge study in 2021, they will be moving to a computer-based assessment as well. All right, great. So we want to pause here. We want to thank you for your time and invite questions. And in the meanwhile, these reports and the data that Sheila and I have shared are both available at the website listed here. So these are, again, international surveys, and you can find out a lot more information than we are able to share. So I'm going to pause here and let's see if anybody has some questions.
Sam, thank you very much for sharing, and I'll monitor the chat box if anyone has questions for you or Sheila.
Well, while we're waiting, Jamie, I just want to let everyone know that there is a great webinar tomorrow related to the work that we do. If you're interested in learning more about students' habits and attitudes toward reading at the international level, the American Institute Research has a session. I'll put it in the chat where you can register. If you just click that, it will take you to the registration page, and there will be a panel. The title is Troubling Trends in Reading Habits and Attitudes, Evidence from PIRLS, PISA, and NAEP. And a panel of experts will highlight findings from a series of studies that examine trends in reading habits and motivations. So they'll be using some of the data from those assessments as well as from the context questionnaires. And it's about an hour, so you're welcome to join that as well. Thank you, Jamie.
You know, before we had cicadas, we would have said, you know, crickets.
Crickets.
And now, because we're inundated with cicadas, we should say cicadas. I don't know, what is cicadas? What noise? I don't know, whatever that noise is.
But again, you know, we have a wealth of information on the NCES website. The latest reports are there. There are tons of graphs also where you can look at the data. And there's also the International Data Explorer. And we invite you to use that as well. Well, if we have no questions, I wanted to thank everyone for participating today and being involved. And again, we remain available if you want to learn more about PISA and PIRLS.
Thank you very much. And thank you to everyone that joined us today as well. Greatly appreciated.
Great. Yes. Thanks. And thanks, Jamie. Thanks, Sheila.
Thank you.
Bye, all.
Bye.